And welcome back. Yeah. This is Book Beat. I'm Larry. We're going to continue with our Spenser series. This is number 9, called Ceremony. We do some other book series as well, but I've been trying to concentrate on Spenser, mainly because there's a Mark Wahlberg movie coming out in March that I'm sure is going to generate a lot of interest in Spenser, and I'd like to get information about as many of his books as possible up. So I'm trying to do 2, sometimes 3 a week if I can get to them, going in order. And we'll at least go into order until at least number 12, which is The Catskill Eagle, which is my favorite Spenser book, and apparently many other people too. So today, Ceremony. Let's take a look. Yeah, so the main character in Ceremony is a young girl named April Kyle. And we are going to be meeting April Kyle a few more times in the future. And we've also got a guy high up in the state high school educational system named Mitchell Poitras, a young classmate of April's named Amy. Susan and Hawk are in this one. Quirk and Belson are in this one. The state police, or local police, sorry, a little bit. We've got some bad guys named Trumps and Red who are actually pimps. And we get to meet for the very first time Tony Marcus, who's basically in charge of all black crime in the Boston area. And in future Spenser novels, we meet Tony Marcus quite a few times, quite a few. But this is the first time that we meet him. So we've got a nice little lineup here today, especially first with April Kyle. As I said, we'll meet her in the future quite often, and Tony Marcus. Basically, this story takes place mainly in Boston. A lot of it takes place in what they call the combat zone, which is basically, I guess, like old 42nd Street in New York City, basically sleaze city in Boston, where cheap sex and prostitution are available. It's apparently not a nice place to be. Haven't been there, don't want to go there, but that's where a lot of this book takes place. And also we make a short trip out to Providence, where Spenser tracks down April Kyle and kind of saves her from what they call a chicken farm, basically a house of prostitution for kinky stuff. So, what's the story about? Well, 16-year-old April Kyle is missing. She's actually a student at the school where Susan works. Susan is a guidance counselor, and she will be a guidance counselor for a few more books before she becomes a psychiatrist, or is it psychologist, counselor. And she's missing, and her father says that he saw her with some guy in the combat zone. Later, Spenser's wondering, why was the father in the combat zone? But the father says he saw her there, and so Susan wants Spenser to find her. And that's what the book's all about, really. Um, Basically, Spenser tracking down April Kyle. It's not that easy. There are complications. There's, like I said, Tony Marcus is involved, and this sleazebag Mitchell Poitras is also involved. So it's a little bit complicated. So what kind of action scenes do we have in this movie? Well, first of all, we've got, Spenser in the combat zone, and basically he confronts two guys, two pimps. I mentioned them already, Red and Trumps. These guys obviously are pretty tough, but seeing Spenser deal with them along with Hawk is some pretty nice scenes. Then, as I mentioned, Spenser goes up to Providence. It's about an hour out of Boston. And there he, in the act of saving April, there's some scenes with a guy named Angelo and Mrs. Ross in the House of Prostitution, where he needs to kind of drag her out against their protests. Obviously, he needs to use his gun, but he gets away. Good scene. It's a very good scene. Next, the big showdown with Tony Marcus. This is kind of an interesting scene because Susan comes home and finds a neighbor's dog dead in her kitchen, shot. And they know Tony Marcus is behind it because he's behind everything that's going on. So Spenser calls Hawk, tells him what went on. The two of them are really pissed off and decide to go and give Tony Marcus a visit. And it's a really tense scene that I highly recommend. We get to know a lot about who Tony Marcus is. He's a tough guy, but he's also an intelligent bad guy. And we even meet him in future books where he's portrayed as someone who is maybe not all that bad of a person. And then the final kind of big action scene is when Spenser, Susan, and Hawk, along with the police a little bit later, basically barge into a big party at Mitchell Poitras's house. And it's kind of a wild, crazy, funny scene. Susan's all excited. Hawk's having a great time, but it's chaos and really well done. Okay, so what are some of the surprises in this story? A few things about Susan's reaction to Mitchell Poitras. I'll read a little bit about their confrontation. And also Susan's reaction, like I said, to the raid on the party. She's really into it. She's really excited. I guess she wouldn't be all excited if she was going in alone, but since Spenser and Hawk are there to protect her, it's kind of exciting for her. Also, her reaction to where Hawk is on Thanksgiving. She and Spenser have a conversation about Hawk and where is he and why don't we invite him over. And Spenser's trying to explain to her why that's just not done, and she just doesn't get it. So her reaction to those different things is kind of interesting in this book. The other really interesting thing is this character, April Kyle. She turns out, if I can tell you, she turns out to become the biggest pain in the ass in the entire Spenser series, I think. And from the very beginning, we meet her, we see she's self-centered, she's selfish, and I think she remains that way. They say people don't change, right? Well, we meet her when she's 16, and people don't change. The other interesting thing is the final solution to the April Kyle problem in this book. I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is, but I'll give you a hint. It involves Patricia Utley, who you have met in previous books. Read through it and enjoy that Spenser Spenser ending. Okay, repeats. Well, guess what? We've got another dysfunctional family. I don't know. They show up all over the place. Last time I explained that, maybe that's not such a rare thing in detective stories, but here it is again. Another asshole father, another woman, mother who's basically on the verge of tears all the time. Obviously, not a good family, not a good marriage. So this is the kind of situation that April Kyle's in, and doesn't want to go back to. And that's one of the dilemmas in the book. Another repeat here. Yep, Spenser doing it again for no fee. That shouldn't be a surprise anymore, and in future books it comes up again and again and again. This time the interesting thing is that he's talked Hawk into helping him out. So we can see the relationship between him and Hawk really developing here because, of course, Spenser's still paying Hawk, but more and more Hawk and Spenser have become close and care about one another's safety, and it's not always about money with Hawk anymore. Another repeat that comes up this time and comes up in future books is the black bad guy's reactions to Hawk teaming up with Spenser. It's like, are you with the honky Hawk, and you're going against your brother's Hawk? And Hawk's like, yeah, I'm with him. And we see this again and again, but it's the first time that we see it here. And it tells us a lot about how Hawk and Spenser feel about each other. Like you might remember, they knew each other when they were young kids. They grew up not knowing each other, on a daily basis, but they were both boxers and worked out of the same gym. And so they have known each other for many, many, many years, but it's only recently that the last few years that they've become close. And then, like I said, Tony Marcus shows up in this book. We've heard his name before, but this is the first time that we actually meet him. So, it's a really nice book. I like it. And let me read you some of my favorite lines from it, okay? So, at the beginning, I like to share the beginnings with you because this kind of sets the scene, doesn't it? So, she's a goddamned whore, Harry Kyle said, and I don't want her in this house again. For God's sake, Harry, you're talking about your own daughter, his wife said. She's a goddamn whore, Harry said. You don't know that, Mr. Kyle, Susan said. By the way, Robert B. Parker is one of these guys that basically sticks to said. He doesn't get into descriptive adjectives at all, and that's part of his writing style. Sparse and simple, and sometimes maybe there's a little bit too much of that. Said. But I like that concept. So the conversation continues. The hell I don't. I saw her in there hanging all over some guy older than me. I saw what she was doing, and she can keep right on doing it because she ain't coming back here. Well, yeah, maybe the father's onto something here. Spenser can't stand the guy and wants to punch him in the nose. But yeah, maybe he really has a clear idea of who his daughter is. That doesn't make her a whore, Mr. Kyle. Don't tell me what it makes and doesn't make, lady. I don't need some goddamn goody two-shoes coming around and giving me a lot of that bleeding heart mumbo-jumbo they teach nowadays. Harry, I said. Susan looked at me. The look said, shut up. A lot of people looked at me like that, but to Susan I paid attention. We were standing in the perfect living room of a perfect house in a perfect development in Smithfield. The upholstery was all in powder blue, and the rug and walls and drapes all coordinated with it. The furniture was massive Mediterranean oak, probably, dark-stained. You could tell they'd bought it all at once. It was a set, a living room set. I was willing to bet my new blackjack that there was a dining room set in the dining room and at least 4 bedroom sets upstairs. The cellar probably had a cellar set, all coordinated with the furnace. So, Spenser really hates these kind of people and this kind of lifestyle. I don't know why exactly, but it just gets on his nerves. Kyle was tall and fat with an unhealthy flush to his face and fleshy neck that spilled over his shirt collar. He'd made a lot of money selling insurance, Susan had told me. And he looked like he'd spent half of it on clothes. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, but the vest and pants were enough to say that the suit had been made for him and probably cost $750. In those days, that was a lot of money for a suit. Fat as he was, there was no gap between the vest and the pants. I gave that kid every chance, Kyle said, and she threw it in my face. His wife said, Please, Harry. I worked my ass off to get us where we are. And she pulls this after all she's gotten? She pulls this on me? Yeah, this is kind of typical in Spenser when he meets this kind of family, the father's reaction like this. No thanks. I don't have a daughter anymore. You understand? His wife said, Maybe it was somebody else, Harry. She was thin, with a dark face and wiry black hair cut short. Her features were thin and her face was narrow. She was wearing a pink blouse and pants and pink shoes. Her eyes were red. I assumed she'd been crying. I didn't blame her. Harry made me feel a little teary myself. Mr. Kyle, Susan said, talk to Spenser. He's an excellent detective. He can find April. Bring her home. You can't reject the child simply because she doesn't please you. Let us try. Listen to her, Harry, his wife said. Your own daughter. Kyle looked at me. Okay, let's hear your pitch, he said. I got no pitch, I said. I just swung by for a charm fix. What's that supposed to mean? Mr. Kyle, Susan said, April could be in serious trouble. If it really was she you saw in the combat zone with an older man, it is important to get her out of there. She looked at me even harder than she had before. So what are you crying to me about? Kyle said. You're worried about her. You go get her. Because I need a home to bring her back to, Mr. Kyle. Yeah, you don't mind bringing her back, but you don't want to take her in, do you? Mr. Kyle, she's not my daughter. Whether I wish to take her in, what's more important is that you wish to take her in. Can't you understand that? Hey, Kyle said, I sold nearly $2 million in life insurance last year, honey. I can understand a lot of things. How much you got on yourself, I said. What's that got to do with anything, Kyle said. If you call Mrs. Silverman honey again, it'll be relevant. What are you, some kind of tough guy? Kyle said. But he didn't say it with very much starch. Yes, I said. Susan put her hand on my arm and squeezed. Mrs. Kyle, Susan said, do you want your daughter back? Yes. She looked at her husband. Yes, but Harry, could I get you some coffee and some cake and we could sit down and try to... She made a flutter with her right hand and stopped talking. For Christ's sake, Bunny, nobody wants any goddamn cake. Harry, I just asked, Mrs. Kyle said. Just shut up, will you, and let me handle this. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other. I looked at Susan. I could see the anger tightening her face, pinching small commas at the corners of her mouth. Kyle turned to us, an in-charge guy, and tossed his chin at me. How much you charge, he said. To work for you? Yes. $200 billion a day. Kyle frowned. For a moment, he'd felt comfortable talking price. He knew about price. You being a wise guy? Yes, I said. You want the job or not? Kyle said. I would rather spend the rest of my life at a Barry Manilow concert, I said. Kyle looked at Susan. I don't know what the hell he's talking about, he said. Susan looked half mad and half amused. He's saying he doesn't want to work for you. Then what the hell did you bring him here for Christ's sake? When I came, I said, I didn't know you. Now I do. If I were your kid, I'd run away too. Bunny Kyle said, Mr. Spenser. Susan said, looking at me at full voltage, the girl, she needs help. Her father is not her fault. Never mind, Kyle said, the hell with him. For me, Susan said, looking right at me, a favor for me. I took in a deep breath. Mrs. Kyle was looking at me. I said to her, I'll work for you, Mrs. Kyle. Like hell you will, Kyle said. I'm not paying you a dime to work for anyone. $1, I said to Mrs. Kyle. I will work for you for $1. I'll find the kid and bring her back to you. Oh, no, Kyle said. No, you don't. I say no, I mean no. I put my face into his. His breath smelled of martini and peanuts. If you don't button it up, I said, with as much control as I had left, I'm going to hurt you. Kyle opened his mouth to speak and looked at me and saw something in my face that made him shut his mouth without speaking. Susan insinuated herself between us. Come on, Ducky, she said. Let's go find April. Yeah, so that's the start of the book. It's a really good beginning, and it's a really good book. I think you'll like it. And I highly recommend Spenser, Book 9, Ceremony. Thanks again. See you guys next time. Take care.